There's no real other option. So I surrendered. And on the other side of that surrender, all of the fear and the panic and terror just subsided. It kind of just fizzled away. And on the other side of that experience was just complete love. And it was that oneness experience. You know, I lost who I was, all the stories and the physical, flesh, all of that was gone.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Recovery. I am so grateful that you are here. Thank you for being here today. And if you would, go ahead and like and subscribe to the podcast and on YouTube. That helps more listeners to reach the show. And speaking of more listeners reaching the show, I want to let you know that if you are interested in working with me one-on-one in a coaching capacity, I am now here opened to working with one or two people as I am integrating all of my life experiences here in Costa Rica and starting to just open up. And I know there's some of you out there who may be interested in working with me one-on-one, and you can go to my website, check it out, read more about my coaching and what I do. But if you're that person listening that is looking for someone to, maybe you're struggling with addiction, but you're a high achiever, entrepreneur, or maybe you're looking to start a business and you're just looking to get over some obstacles, you can read about what I do, or you can just listen to some of the podcast episodes to learn more about me and my services. So if that's for you, just go ahead and reach out to me on Instagram or any of the ways, LinkedIn, reach out and love to have a conversation with you if that's a good fit. With that said, I'm really excited for today's guest, Henry Winslow, who is the founder of Tricycle Day, an incredible newsletter that you're now going to learn all about in this episode. And we have a fascinating conversation that's not only about Henry's story and where he came from and what he's done, but also this conversation about men's health and fatherhood and all these topics that are really important and not talked about enough. That communal capital, having a community. But just overall, Henry is just an extremely talented, smart individual that has really just followed his path, his dharma to start Tricycle Day, to reach so many different people. And again, this is a great episode too, if you are an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, want to become an entrepreneur, on really how to get started and how to get people's attention. So just a fascinating conversation with a fascinating individual. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Henry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jesse. Happy to be here. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. It's great to have you on. And yeah, I'm excited for this episode for many reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons is we have more mutual connections than I thought. And I like to start off with how I met someone or how they came on the show when I remember to say this. And I think for you, we were introduced through, was it Randy? Dr. Randy Evans?
Nico.
Oh, it was Nico. Okay. So Nico with Althea. And and obviously which we're going to get deep into, your newsletter, which is extremely fun, extremely informative, just balancing all these different emotions in this really, complicated space and very healing space. So I'm just so glad that you took the time to come on today. We're going to dive into it. There's some other connections we have I'll bring up later that are mutual connections, other guests that have been on the show. But yeah, just welcome. And how are you doing today?
Yeah, I feel good. And, I imagine there are probably many mutual connections that we haven't even identified yet. This world's pretty small.
Guarantee
you noticed that.
Yes. And even your connection with the medicine 5-MeO-DMT is really special, and that connection and your experience with that medicine that I can't wait to hear about, which I know inspired things that you're doing. And in your books over there, How to Change Your Mind, PCAL, these are exciting. Yeah, exciting things. So let's get into your story. I'd like my audience to get to know you better. And I'd like to, wherever you have you have an interesting story. I know your story, but I'd like the audience to get to know your story, and then we'll get into how you became the Henry we know today.
Yeah. It all started on a Sunday morning in 1989. No, we'll skip that part. My interest in psychedelics started with my yoga practice. So I had been practicing yoga for about 10 years, really intensely. It was a very important part of my life and a very consistent part of my life at that point. And it still is, actually, to this day. But I'm just kind of painting the scene. I had become a full-time yoga teacher. In fact, it was so important to me. And all of my friends were in my yoga community. I met my wife through practicing yoga. She was also a yoga teacher. And at that point in my practice, it's far beyond the show up to a yoga class, roll out your mat and do some stretching for a little bit. And okay, now I'm done with yoga. It was a fully integrated part of my life. And that included studying the ancient texts and trying to understand and embody the esoteric practices beyond the asana. And one of the foundational texts of yoga is called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and it lays out this eightfold process or path of yoga, of which one is asana, but the last three are actually just progressive stages of meditation. So first, you focus on an object. Second, everything else besides you and the object disappears. And then finally, the end stage, which is sometimes called yoga, just like the practice, but it's also sometimes called samadhi, is where the distinction between the self and the other, or the subject and the object, even that falls away. And what's left is just oneness, sometimes called unity consciousness. That's why it's non-dual. And so that was a really awesome idea just to even think about and grapple with intellectually. I didn't think I would ever get a chance to experience it myself, given that I'm, a modern day householder at this point, hustling around New York City, trying to teach enough classes to make ends meet. But a friend of mine who was in my yoga community came in and had just had an extremely powerful experience with psychedelics. And she positioned it to me as like, hey, this is a way to experience samadhi. Something that was out of reach unless we were ascetics, in India disappearing into a cave. So, before that, I didn't really have much interest in psychedelics. Didn't think about them much at all, actually. But when she described it as being a way to access samadhi, that got my attention. So I went from basically zero interest in psychedelics to having a Bufo ceremony. So a ceremony with 5-MeO-DMT, like you said. At the time, I didn't really understand that most people consider that to be one of the more powerful, maybe most powerful psychedelics out there. But to me, it was just like, okay, this is the one that is aligned to achieving samadhi. I'm in. Like, show me where to sign.
Yeah. Wow. 0 to 1 million. Going from your first psychedelic, man, I know that you went really deep into yoga. So yeah. I want to build on that too, because, yoga obviously has many components. I didn't understand how deep yoga is and the philosophies of yoga. It's not just the movement, right? That's maybe one of the smallest parts of yoga. But so you end up I know you even had a podcast about yoga, and you were all in yoga. So
yeah.
You have this samadhi experience that you're about to tell us about with 5-MeO. And I'm so curious that pathway, because I know so many people that are thinking about psychedelics or, and they're into yoga or meditation or Christianity or whatever, religion or whatever it is. So they're even a recovery pathway could be almost like a religious experience for people. So from addiction. So, you have this
12-step process includes, having to surrender to a higher power than yourself, right?
That's the point of the whole book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, I'm so curious. So you have all this, a decade, 10,000 hours into this, and then you have this Bufo experience. So I want to just give that context, because a lot of people just kind of dip their toes and leave things. They don't stay all in, and you are all into this practice. And then you have this 5-MeO. So what happens next?
Yeah. Thank you for seeing me and recognizing that. I think that is an important distinction to make, because, coming out of that experience, and I'll go back to, what it actually felt like and all of that. But coming out of that experience, after I had, there was a little bit of a destabilization. And eventually I was like, okay, this was really powerful and positive for me. And, the temptation is to be like, everybody needs to go do this, right? Because it was so amazing. But what I realize now in hindsight is that although the language and the explicit direct conversation around preparation and integration were not there, they were not part of the equation for me, the substance of those things was very much a part of my experience. I see all of the work that I did with yoga, both intellectually and in practice, as preparing me to know what to do with an experience like 5-MeO-DMT, which rocks your world. I mean, it completely changed the way that I saw myself, who I am, what I am, and the world around me. And had I not had that yoga practice to set me up to understand what just happened, and had I not had the yoga practice afterward to be able to come back into my body and to have a community to talk to about this that was receptive to these kinds of ideas, who knows if it would have been a positive transformation for me. It could have been something that was just more psychologically destabilizing than anything else. So to describe the actual experience, if you want to go there, I understood going into it that the most important thing to do was to surrender to the experience, whatever comes up. I wasn't told a lot about the contour, the color, flavor of the experience. I think partly because it's different for everyone, and also because my practitioner didn't want me to come in with too many preconceived ideas. But he told me the most important thing to do is surrender. So I took that to heart. I inhaled the medicine. I held my breath. And before I could even let the breath out, I was gone, in another dimension, basically. And I remember, the sensation in my body, which is one way to think about things, is like the feelings, was that my being was pulled out of my body down, like a gravity was pulling it into the center of the universe. And it became bigger. But before it got big, I felt a lot of emotion. I felt a lot of terror, a lot of panic, a lot of fear. And that's when the reminder about surrender kicked back in. And I said, okay, I'm just supposed to surrender. Whatever this is, I'm in it. There's nothing I can do about it. That's one nice thing about Bufo, is that it like resistance is futile. So it kind of encourages surrender. There's no real other option. So I surrendered. And on the other side of that surrender, all of the fear and the panic and terror just subsided. It kind of just fizzled away. And on the other side of that experience was just complete love. And it was that oneness experience. I lost who I was, all the stories and the physical, flesh, all of that was gone. And if I am not that, but I still exist in this pure consciousness, maybe that's what I am, and that was, to me, the most beautiful realization. And in fact, I remember the last thing that my mind could even conjure in words before that went away was, you made it. Like, this is the point. This is why you exist. This is why you were given the gift of life, was to experience this direct connection to your true nature.
Yeah. Just something really small. Nothing, no big deal.
No big deal. Yeah. I mean, it was like a soul orgasm almost.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. And yeah, it's so interesting because I think about my experience with like the religious upbringing I had, which was traumatic in many ways, just because it was just everything is always back to that one source. Never me, never my accomplishments. It's always, celebrating something outside myself. And so that can be a destabilizing experience. So having this experience you had, did you have any type of connection to God, source, oneness before this? Or is this the first time where you really had this experience?
Yeah. It was certainly the first time that I ever connected so directly and transparently to an idea of God or source. I didn't grow up in a religious household, so I didn't have, I say this and it carries connotation. I don't really mean it that way, but I didn't have baggage. Like, I just didn't have, I was a blank slate really before I came into yoga. And yoga was kind of my first real connection to spirit. And I found that right away, even way before psychedelics. I remember my first yoga class. I was in Shavasana, and I felt like, okay, there's something happening here that is healing me at a level beyond just the stretching. And it's like in the essence of being rather than doing. And, I just followed that thread, that curiosity, and it took me step by step further into my practice, and it eventually led me to psychedelics. So it felt like, a real progression in a way. But yeah, to compare to your experience based on what you're telling me, I didn't have to rewrite beliefs. I kind of just got to start from anew.
Yeah, it's one of those deep topics that I think maybe gets talked about, but maybe not enough about psychedelics and God and connection. And, it's so personal because you can build your entire life's frame around a higher power or God. And then you have these experiences with psychedelics, especially like 5-MeO or some of these bigger master teacher plants. And next thing you know, you're like, you either more stabilized to saying, wow, it is true. It is all love. It is all connection. Or you're destabilized because you went beyond what the mind conceived of this higher source.
And I guess even as I reflect on the answer I just gave you, like, it's unfair to say that I didn't have preconceived ideas, because even if I didn't grow up in a religious household, I mean, it pervades the culture, right? And I had friends that talked about it, and I knew about monotheistic religions, and a lot of friends were practitioners of the Christian faith, of Judaism and whatnot. So it wasn't complete tabula rasa, but to have a direct experience to me feels like, why would I ever go based on faith? Because I can know it having experienced it. I don't have to just suspend disbelief. I can know.
Yeah, I wonder if Jesus did actually smoke the toad, and then they took that out of the Bible, because I've heard they've taken some books out of the Bible. So that could have been Bufo 1-1, in the Bible.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
We don't know. Maybe we'll find out, though. Maybe those scrolls will pop up in the, because then they just found out in Egypt under the pyramids are like these massive structures, I just heard. So maybe they'll pop up in those places.
Yeah, there are all sorts of academic historical theories about how different religious figures were influenced by psychedelic plants. And we know for sure, from archaeological evidence, that people have used psychedelic plants and fungi all over the world in various traditions. So would not be surprised if there were something in there that didn't get told in full detail.
Yeah. Have you had anyone in your newsletter who's an archaeologist who's uncovered any of these deep mysteries?
So the big story that got a lot of attention in popular culture was The Immortality Key by Brian Muraresku. And he talks about how the kukion, this drink that was used in ancient Greece as a rite of passage, may or may not have been turned hallucinogenic with ergot, which is a fungus from which LSD is derived. But I actually just spoke to someone. This interview has not yet come out yet in the newsletter, but she's a theologian and religious scholar, and she has some hot takes around why that theory is actually weak and has flaws in it, logical flaws in it. So that'll come out soon.
Nice.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how you went from the yogi, which you could still be that today, but such a deep practice into yoga, and then you have this Bufo experience, and then did that inspire you to start Tricycle Day? What's the timeline from that experience to Tricycle Day?
Yeah, of course I would never have wanted to do a Tricycle Day had I not had a profound personal experience myself. But it didn't immediately lead to launching Tricycle Day as the next step. Coming back from that journey, I had my community, and I had, what was my Dharma at that point. And I think Dharma is, that's in the yoga tradition, dharma is sometimes translated as purpose, but it's also sometimes translated as path. So I think of, one's purpose as being fluid and dynamic, and it is a journey in and of itself. So at that time, I had my dharma, and I was going to go back to my yoga community and bring in these spiritual insights and have even more experience behind what I was sharing as the purpose of yoga and what we're all doing here, getting together and sweating and breathing. So I didn't have any sort of intention or pressure to do anything professionally with psychedelics right away. I just became interested in following the space. So I wanted to explore more medicines. I wanted to know about what was happening and how they were increasing in access in various ways. Because, at that point, and still to this day, 5-MeO is really only facilitated underground unless you're in a clinical trial. So I started following that, and a lot started happening around that time. This was 2019 that I had that first Bufo ceremony. But things really picked up around 2020 and 2021. Michael Pollan's book had already come out, so there was more interest. But then there were a ton of biopharma companies that started getting funded at kind of crazy, unsustainable valuations around that time, just because of macroeconomic conditions. It was a big bubble in 2021. But then you also saw a lot of policy reform. The first few cities got decriminalized, which was a big deal that a lot of people never expected to happen. And then, Oregon came online, I think in late 2022 or early 2023 as the first state legal regulated marketplace for non-medical use, facilitated use. So as I watched all this happen, and I'm just an interested bystander, right? I have no vested interest in what's happening. I still felt like, I'm eager to consume this information. And if I am, probably more people are too. And the problem was I was having to get everything in all these different places. And not all of it was really consumer ready, everyday people language. So I thought, if I want this, other people probably do too. So I started aggregating the information and presenting it in a way that felt fun, which I felt like was missing in the market.
Yeah. So, how did because that makes sense. I feel like the earth went through almost like a dark night of the soul in that from 2019. I have so many people who have stories in 2019, and then it's after 2019 into this COVID portal it's what happened during those 4 years. So, it was interesting to see, like you said, because I get into psychedelics right after I wrote my book about addiction recovery in 2021. I released it, and literally 2 months later, 15 years of abstinence, sobriety, all in 12-step to, okay, I'm going to explore this pathway, because it was a deep calling. It wasn't hey, I want to get high, I'm done with sobriety. It was completely the opposite. It was all into, I don't like the word biohacking so much, but biohacking and all these different practices I was doing. And then COVID hits, and it's a deep catharsis, and so how did what was the first person that was on Tricycle Day? Who was the first person you featured? What products were there? How did you get to that first newsletter?
Yeah, well, so when I first started it didn't have the same format as it has today. It didn't take a ton of time to get to where we are now with the format. But yeah, there was an exploratory phase where I was figuring out what exactly this looks and feels like. And before I ever even told a soul that I was doing this, I just wrote the first issue and sent it to myself. I was like, is this even something that I want to do? Is this a fun process? Because I know, having had a podcast in the past, that when you take on a creative entrepreneurial effort, even if it's just a side project, it requires a certain level of consistency and discipline to follow through and get anywhere with it. I knew it wasn't going to take off right away. So I wanted to make sure it was something that I enjoyed doing. And so I did that. And at first I was writing and sending an issue every single day. It was a daily newsletter. But I found that pretty much right away, within a few of those, I was like, the news flow is here for that. There's definitely enough happening that I could send an issue every week, or every day rather. But I don't think any part of the service is in consolidating the information and giving people a briefing. And so weekly felt right when I started. I didn't have the psychonaut POV as part of it yet. It was just, this is what's happening in psychedelic research, policy reform, and business. So I was weekly. And then I had the idea like, okay, I can add more color to this by bringing in other people's perspectives. And that's where Psychonaut POV fit in. And at first, it was all in one issue. And it just got to be super, super long. So I broke it out into two at that point. The first person I interviewed was a woman named Sophie Mikhailova. Hopefully I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. And it was just someone who I came across on social media as being involved in the psychedelic space. And she was like a freelance journalist herself. So we connected over that. And I just, it was very kind of casual. It's just like, hey, what's your favorite psychedelic? Like, what are you trying to do? And why do you use them? And over time, it's kind of evolved more into diving into people's specific areas of expertise. And I try to talk to people who are really shaping, what's happening in the psychedelic space, whether they are researchers or, business operators or policymakers.
Yeah, what caught my attention with your newsletter at first was obviously like it's fun, right? It's even the colors and the little, I don't know, it's just a fun newsletter. But then the information is very critically important too. And that's when I started to be like, really started paying attention to it. And then I started to see like my friends featured on like Dr. Rick Barnett. I'm like, whoa, wait. And then I started to realize like, wait, I have a podcast. I should just read Tricycle Day and get some guests from your psychonaut point of view part of it. And so, yeah, it's really, I love how without forcing life to happen, it almost just came to me. Like your newsletter became something that became important to me, not only for the news and the updates and the humor, but also because the guests and those questions and keeping it in a place where my attention span, which like I think our attention span now is like negative 7.7 seconds now, and I don't quote me on that, it's not science, but that it's enough to be like, okay, I'm in, and then it's ending, and then I want to know more, so I think it's just really well done, really sharp, really polished. And so it's
and I see the brevity as a part of the service that I provide, because we're having this long form conversation, and that's beautiful, and it's definitely got value too. But I recognize that challenge of like the competition for people's attention, and to me, I want to make this as easy to consume as possible, and that kind of underpins everything that I'm doing. That's why there's the humor. That's why it's like got the fun colors. It's inviting to read. And so it's a natural extension of that when I do the interviews to say, okay, I'll do the work of talking to this person, and I enjoy the work, to be clear, but I'll do the work of talking to this person for 45 minutes, an hour, and then I'm going to distill it down to the essence so that you can absorb the information in 5 minutes.
So like, I'm sure the Tricycle Day has evolved into more than just the newsletter too. You have like a community now, and you have other things. And I think like I didn't even realize that, because there's so much there, even though there is brevity, but there's like a lot of important things. Like when I read through that, I'm like, whoa, this is really important. If you're even considering the psychedelic space, or if you're in it, it's like, these are extremely important points. But then you have other parts of the newsletter that I didn't know about, like your private community for facilitators and stuff like that. Can you speak to the other things I didn't even know about until we spoke last time?
Yeah. So my approach from like a business, I know that you have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to this podcast. So this is kind of, we're entering the part of the conversation that will appeal to them, I think. I think of the newsletter as being a product for sure. And it's also the top of the funnel for deeper engagement with my business. So, I want like a large percentage, I don't know the exact number, but let's say 90%, of newsletter readers will never pay Tricycle Day a dime. And that's okay. It's monetized through selling ad placements. So their attention is monetizable. We'll put products in there that would appeal to them, and, people and businesses will pay for that attention. But within our business itself, I also have an agency. So the agency is for clinics and plant medicine centers mostly, who want help with building their email list, lead generation, and client conversion. And so we do that. And having the newsletter be a reputable source of information, brings in a lot of inbound. So that's one. Then we also have another form of sponsorship, which is the directory for psychedelic professionals, facilitators, guides, therapists, etc. So that's like basically the lowest cost sponsorship, is they can support Tricycle Day, and in exchange we list them, and we have readers who are on the more consumer side who are looking for professional support, and so they trust Tricycle Day. They'll go look at our list of vetted providers. And then finally is the community that you mentioned. It's a private membership community for psychedelic facilitators who have done the work, probably had an apprenticeship or gone through a certification program of some kind. They know how to sit with clients. We don't touch that aspect of it, but what we teach them through coaching and expert workshops is how to build the business side of their practice. So how do you think about who your target customer is, and how do you attract them? And especially, how do you handle marketing in an industry where, visibility carries some risk? So these are difficult questions. It's a nuanced kind of conversation. So it really helps to have a private, safe space for people to have those conversations.
Yeah. So there's, I think there's all different types of people of my audience that listen to this podcast. And I get to hear from some of my guests. It's really inspiring where they're coming from. Some are coming from sober living homes, and some are extremely successful entrepreneurs that have businesses that have the everyday challenges, such as, like you said, marketing. So I'm just curious when it comes to the marketing, like even for myself, I don't do the greatest job of marketing Entrepreneurs Recovery, and my email list is not that big, but there's a lot of potential to make it a lot bigger. Mm-hmm. So last time we talked, you talked about, building like a lead magnet that is some type of guide or something to give to someone. Can you just speak to that? So the people that are listening, because there's also a lot of solopreneurs that listen to this podcast, and the bottom line is they're probably listening for another reason, but now I want to capture their attention to be like, there's people who are successful, like you're, I'm sure I don't know what your goal is it 100,000, people reading the newsletter or something like that, whatever goal it is. But, to get there, you have to use different techniques to get you. You can't just be like, well, I'll just smoke the Bufo, go to the higher source, and it will come to me. It's like, you still have to do the work. You still have to integrate, and you still got to run a business at the end of the day. So can you speak to that? Like, how does someone...
there's a lot to speak to there. I'll just answer the last part real quick. You might get insight from medicine. And I actually, this may be a somewhat controversial take. I think using medicine to improve your business is actually a really valid use case, provided that you're healthy and are in a stable place to do that. But to your point, you can get the insight, but that's just showing you a door to walk through. Like, you still have to actually do the work. It's just a matter of, are you doing the work in the right direction? And that's where I think medicine can be helpful, is in guiding you. But to go back to the previous question around like a lead magnet, my entire business is based off of an email list, right? So it should come as no surprise that I'm a big believer in email marketing. So like a lot of people, are really like indexed into social media. And I think social media is a great place to build an audience for sure, because there's discoverability there. You have the algorithms working in your favor, provided that you are creating good content that connects to people. But the problem with social media, if you leave it there, is that you don't own the relationship with your audience. And so the platforms can decide at any given time, like, okay, we're only going to show this to 2% of the people who've explicitly raised their hand and said, I want to follow this person. Whereas with email, if you have that relationship, somebody's opted into your email list, you send the email, it's going to go to them. So, I believe a lot in owning the relationship with your audience. So I would always encourage people, especially if you're building a business off of social media, that you have some sort of bridge to take them from that place where they discover you into a place where you control the relationship. And so that's where a lead magnet comes in. A lead magnet could be something like a PDF. It could be like an info session. It could be a webinar. There are lots of different formats that it could take. But the general idea is you're solving some sort of problem, and they have to exchange their information. That's the price that they pay, is to give you their contact information in order to access it. And so what our conversation was, when we spoke before this podcast, last time we connected, was, you're building this amazing audience with your podcast. People listen to this and they're connected to you. They hear your voice and your heart come through when you're having these conversations with people that you respect. And now, like, those people, like, how do you stay in contact with them? Of course, you can keep putting out episodes, which is a great thing to do, and you should. But if they want to go deeper, maybe you offer them something as like a quote unquote ad read in the middle of your conversation with someone and say, hey, if you're having this problem that you've identified as common amongst your listenership, then go to this website and drop in your email, and I'm going to send you the solution to it. And now they're on your list.
Yeah, I think that's great. I've been challenged by a few of my entrepreneurial friends to do that exact thing. With this podcast, is like at the beginning of the podcast or at the end. You have a lot of podcasts you hear, like they'll do it in the middle of the podcast. They'll have an ad and stuff like that, which is something I haven't done yet. And I think maybe starting today, I'll try something in the intro of the podcast to, just to see how that lands. Just because, like I was saying to you earlier, like I want to, and this is like for anyone, like what's pulling you, right? Like Tricycle Day, I'm sure it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but it's ultimately like there's energy there. It's it magnetized me and so many of these friends that I have in the space. And I think for me, the podcast is what is, no matter what's going on in my world, it just seems to kind of have a life of its own. And there's so many people emailing me, whether it's AI bots or not, it doesn't matter. They're asking me to come on the show. And I'm like, whoa, this didn't happen 7 months ago. When I moved to Costa Rica, it seemed like there was like an energy shift that happened. And I started to have, so what I'm saying is, like, anyone listening, like, what's most alive in your business, right? Like what is not this like intense labor of pain? What's more of like a labor of love that you have to put work into, but it's pulling you towards it. And that's really what my podcast has been.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I would echo all what you're saying. It takes work. All businesses take work, but some work feels like it sucks and some work is fun. And moreover, you can also tell based on the reception from the people who are outside of you, who are like on the receiving end of the work. Like, does it feel like it's landing? And are they asking for more? And are they telling you why it's great? Then like, that's a good indication that it's alive too.
Yeah. How do you choose your people who want to sponsor your newsletter? Like, how do you have that choice? Cause like I'm just going to be straight up. Like, I've had treatment centers, very successful, reach out and be like, hey, we want you to interview our CEO and we want to maybe collaborate. And I'm just like, what? Like, what is your intention? Like, why would I promote your treatment center? It just seems kind of strange to do that. But there's also products that are amazing that, I promote and stuff. But how do you choose and differentiate between things that are kind of on those ethical lines of, I don't know if that makes sense.
That's a great question. It's a great question. I'll say the first way that I handle that is that I maintain a very strict firewall between editorial and advertising. So, I don't sell the Psychonaut POV spots. Nobody has ever paid for that. And I will never accept money for that because I don't want money to get in the way of editorial integrity. And I want what drives the decision about who's coming on to be based on what's going to produce the greatest content that's of most value to my readers. And now, like, there isn't necessarily a conflict there because I want sponsors who also provide value to my readers, right? But to me, it's important to say, this is sponsored content and this is not. And so there's a sponsored spot in every newsletter. And basically how I choose, who's going to be there is, who has a product that I think is going to land well with my readers, because I don't want to take an advertiser's dollars and have it be a flop. I want long-term relationships. And so if it performs well for them, they're going to renew. And that's the ideal.
Yeah, I love that. It's such an important conversation. I feel like there's people who reach out to me or who have podcasts and some who are just getting started, want to start. And it's like, how do you choose who, if that even happens, if you even get that opportunity? But when it does happen, and which it's starting to happen for me, it's like, who, what am I going to take on? And, you know, so yeah, it's just it's an interesting conversation because, I wonder how many companies take on sponsorships due to desperation and financial means and different ways. And I never want to be in that spot, hopefully that, I have to take on, a treatment center that I've never been to and I don't know anything about, but it's like, and I know people do that, they take on sponsorships so they can afford the podcast because it's not free, right? This is not free. Anyone who runs a podcast knows like, this isn't free and I don't have any sponsors. So it's like,
it costs money to produce. And then also like, if you want to make it your full-time thing and you want to give your full heart to it, you also have to pay for your living expenses. So it needs to be a business, right? The other thing I would say about this conversation is that if you do interview someone who has, a business interest that they're trying to promote, like when people come to me often, and they specifically ask to be interviewed versus me going to them and inviting them, it's because they want to promote something. And I just make it very clear, like, we can talk about your thing for sure, but I'm going to have questions that I want to ask that are about, that are not directly tied to your business. And like, I want to make sure that everybody wins here. And so having some control over the narrative, I think is important too, to make sure that it doesn't feel like, it's just a commercial for somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that conversation. It's just, I think it's a great conversation. I don't think many people, were maybe expecting, even though this is called Entrepreneurs in Recovery. I feel, that I have so many amazing minds on here that are building incredible projects. And, I have a lot to learn from you and what you're doing. And I think that side of it's really exciting, as well as the psychedelic and samadhi and all the things too. I mean, that's important too. I did, so you're a father. Congratulations. That's awesome. You're a dad. And, that's a whole experience in itself, and one that I haven't had yet, but one that I have many friends and brothers who have children. And, I know we have a common mutual friend, John Vroman, who's one of the first guests on this podcast, and that you're involved in Front Row Dad. So I'd just like to hear about that side of your life. What is it like being a dad and being in this space of psychedelics, and also just being part of the community of men, and how does that impact your well-being and mental health?
Yeah. John Vroman is awesome. He's the founder of Front Row Dads, which is a community that I'm a part of. A lot of people, I live in Austin, Texas, and he's based in Austin as well. And a lot of the membership is here, but it's actually a decentralized group with members all over the US and maybe even abroad as well. But it's been awesome just to make an intentional choice to surround myself with men who have similar values to me. And so the tagline of Front Row Dads is, we are family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. So it's about keeping the priorities straight. And I think part of it is just making that choice and committing to it by aligning yourself to a brand that stands for something. It kind of just subconsciously reinforces it for you. But then there's the more explicit kind of direct support that you get from actually interacting with the other members. So that's been cool, and kind of just keeping me honest as I, have competing demands on my time. Running a business takes a lot out of you, but all these guys, not all, but a good majority of the people in that group are also entrepreneurs, and they're making it work. So you get to see what's possible, and it feels real and it feels normal. So that's one way it's helped me. And then outside of the business part and the priorities part, I think there's just something really nice about being in a group of men who are making a choice to be emotionally attuned and open up and be vulnerable and kind of explore the edges of what masculinity can mean, and change, go against maybe some role models or patterns that were not necessarily the most helpful in the way that we grew up. And that's becoming more common now, for sure. People are kind of testing that. And I think masculinity has kind of come under attack, frankly, in the past few years. I mean, there's all the toxic masculinity stuff, and it almost became a bad word, but it feels like we're coming out of that now, and choosing for ourselves, what a new definition of what masculinity can look like in a way that is good and not neutered, right? Like it's still different from femininity and can still be healthy.
Yeah, I appreciate that take. I mean, my my closest friend, we were together at an event, and John was there, and they promoted front row dads way before it became what it has become. This is like 2017, but
Yeah, that's been right at the beginning.
right at the beginning, and my friend was like so inspired by the video and their take, and John, that he ended up, he ended up having children right after that, just because of John's, video about what you just said and what that group of men represent. And that really left an impact on me. And, and I've followed John's journey too, but what you're saying, I'm wondering the correlation between, you have this epidemic of mental health. I mean, there's so many men, let's put psychedelics aside, let's put it all, I mean, just like, there's just like an epidemic of epic proportions with mental health, and men especially, because whether it's childhood narrative trauma or passed down trauma, or just like this idea of not expressing emotions, and it almost doesn't matter what culture or what ethnic background. There's like this thing of like keep it all bottled inside, and
because it's a sign of weakness.
Weakness.
The idea. You believe that it's
shame,
a show of weakness to be emotional.
Yeah. So like, what is it when it comes to being involved in a group of men like this? How has that helped you be able to, because I know John personally, and I know, like, even if you listen to the podcast, he said stuff that I was like, I can't believe he just said that on the show, the vulnerability, and how real he was on the show and authentic. And that's really what I want this show to be. I don't want it to be this facade of me or my guests. I want it to be extremely vulnerable. So how has that impacted you in that way?
I appreciate this line of questioning because it's really helping me crystallize my thinking around like why it is that I'm in this group and why it's so valuable. I think the answer is that I see all of these guys who are practicing what they preach. They are willing to be emotional and talk about their darkness, talk about their shadow. And it would be one thing if they were all failures, by conventional measures, because then that would reinforce the old narrative that emotional vulnerability is a sign of weakness. But it's actually the opposite. Like these guys are all badasses. They're crushing it. Like they have families they love and who love them. And yes, they go through challenges, of course, but like, they have businesses that are succeeding. And so it actually, it proves the opposite. It shows that in fact, this is part of strength, and it makes me see it in a tangible way, which makes it a lot easier to take that step to do it yourself.
Yeah. And, it's just so weird that you mentioned that on our conversation that you're in front row dads. Cause like, I was like, what? This world is so small. And, I know many men in front row dads, and some of them have had deep impacts on my business and just my way of thinking. And so I'm just going to kind of keep going down this path of like, when it comes to integration support with psychedelics, or it comes to, men who are literally just looking for a friend, never mind a community to share life's challenges with. How important is it to have community in general, just to bounce? Because you had the yoga community at one point, and now you have front row dads, and you may have some other communities. How important is that for your mental stability and to be able to, just feel whole as a man and be able to share these types of challenges that you're going through as a dad or a business owner? Like, how critically important is that? Is that what you joined front row? Like, I'm just kind of curious, like how important that is.
Yes, it is. And it became, I became aware of how important it was when I more or less lost that yoga community. I mean, I still have friendships that were forged during that time, but it was a moment in time. Like the studio no longer exists. Everybody kind of went their separate ways. We went through the COVID portal that you brought up earlier, and that just kind of ruptured the whole thing. And so the years after that were noticeably more difficult for me. And fortunately, I still have my nuclear family, my wife and my son now, who's 2.5. But I think it's really important. And I saw that something was missing from having close friendships that could go deep outside of my marriage. And so that is the reason why I joined Front Row Dads. It's like, I want this community. I want this environment where I can like share deeply and also be on the receiving end of deep shares. And if I'm going to pick a community to do that, let's at least pick one who is aligned around similar values.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it just reminds me of like, how did I become the person I am today, right? I for me, there was a community that was the 12 steps I was court ordered to be in, but I'm glad that it happened because I met incredible men and women, but incredible men specifically that are still the closest people in my life. And, that's because there was a communal capital. There was a community that I could tap into. And today, now, those are lifelong friendships, and I'm sure that that's what's happening with the men's community you're in. And so I just think about how that translates into the psychedelic community. We've had people on here, Kevin, who runs Psychedelics and Recovery, and these different groups to honor the different pathways to healing or addiction recovery or whatever you want to call it. These highly stigmatized, triggering, words and topics. But, when we sort of just realize like, what is the fundamental reason these are working? It's that, just like that connection to yourself, that, I believe that like addiction and this idea of disconnection from yourself and all the ways you don't love yourself is the core of addiction. And I believe that once you start to put that together, you start to feel more wholeness, which sometimes can be through connection with other people. That can be your way to start to love your own self, is the way you reflect the mirror towards others, because those people can hold a compassionate lens towards you, see your brightness, see your potential until you can. And then eventually when you can, okay, now I have I can let go of some of this shame and self-worth. And then that becomes source, God, and it becomes that love that you're seeking. And then, of course, psychedelics can, depending on the structure of the setup and your support through that psychedelic journey, can also give you an incredible touch with love, grace, all of these different things. So yeah, it just I think it's just like it's so important to have all these elements in this.
That's why I think it's so cool that we're seeing a lot of movement with people fighting for like the religious use of psychedelics as sacrament, because that feels like a really kind of productive setting or container to facilitate these sort of communal experiences where it's almost like you could take away the psychedelic, frankly, and people could still have that experience of connection to one another and seeing the other as the mirror, and rewriting some ideas about that are giving them shame and self-doubt. But the psychedelic aspect is just a potentiator. It's an enhancer, because it gives you that insight. Maybe it might give you that insight that like there's love inside, and I can see that, and it just kind of speeds up the whole process. But to have it in the group, I think, is really powerful for that. Maybe not necessary in 100% of cases, but often an enhancer.
Well, people who come to me coming from the Alcoholics Anonymous world I've come from, and a lot of these prickly points of like, okay, you relapse now, go away. We're actually starting to evolve into that as we're looking at the laws, we're looking at leadership changes of like, where is this going? And I think it's going to be more commonplace to be sitting in a 12-step group in 4 years and be like, oh yeah, I've done MDMA-assisted therapy. Of course I did. My doctor recommended it. It's legal. Right now, it's like obviously not legal. It's put holes in your brain, all these misnomers that are obviously false, but, done in maybe a sound structure with proper integration support, affordability, accessibility, which is a whole nother conversation. It could have extremely powerful healing opportunities for people to expand in their journey. But I want to say this quote because I always think about it, but you talked about, you almost don't even need the psychedelic to have a psychedelic experience if you have someone witnessing you. And there's a great quote by Peter Levine, and it's, trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. And how powerful is that? Because really, if you think about the traumatic moments of your life, even destabilizing psychedelic experiences. If you have someone there as an empathetic witness when it happens, or immediately after it happens, all of a sudden it's not stuck in the body keeping the score of this episode that replays over and over and over, especially when you don't want it to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You know what's really cool? Sorry to interrupt you, but I just have to piggyback off what you're saying is like, you can actually be your own empathetic witness. Like when you're working through these traumatic memories, I found in my experience, like one of the most healing journeys I've had was in going back to a memory that was really difficult for me as a child, but being there as like a separate version of me now. And like people talk about this parts work, internal family systems, but I got to be my own empathetic witness and say, hey, I see you and like, you're okay. And you mentioned the Thank You Life podcast. Kevin, who hosts that, he encouraged me, I don't know if this happened on air or afterward, but to establish a practice around that and make it a continual thing to check in with that younger version of Henry. And so I do that now as like part of my meditation sometimes, or just intuitively when I feel like he needs someone, you know?
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I actually working with the person I work with, my therapist / coach, we just talked about recently about, and this is going to sound weird to people, but not if you're a people pleaser and someone who's just an overgiver, like I've been throughout my whole life. I am looking to ways to be more selfish, which is probably the normal baseline of humans. But for me to even be a little selfish it's just not how I receive love. I got love by giving myself away. That was the way it was. And so now I'm working with my self, my inner child, this part of myself, and both of the adult self, to be like, how can we be a little more selfish? Like I'm giving all of this energy away, and it's like, how can I be more selfish? Which might sound weird to people, but it's something that's really helpful for me, and it's a way of self-love to myself.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Yeah. Have you heard of positive intelligence by any chance?
I don't think so.
It's sort of like one of these personality quizzes, like an Enneagram kind of thing, but it tells you what your saboteurs are. And it's kind of like parts work, where there's like a certain aspect of yourself that's sabotaging you. And one of them is the pleaser. And when I went through this exercise of figuring out like who my saboteurs were, my main one is the achiever or the high achiever. And it comes from the same root trauma, right? It's like often it's like parent stuff. Like you're trying to win the love of your parents. And I could have easily had mine been the pleaser, right? It's like, I need to take care of you in order to be loved. But instead, for whatever reason, my karma or whatever, it was like, I need to achieve so that you love me. So I can totally understand why you feel like you need to be more selfish to come back into a more healthy baseline. It's like, it's so that the pleaser is not running the show. You can still please people, but you're the director and you can choose to bring that person in when it feels appropriate.
Yeah. I think, it comes back to bringing more authority back to yourself too. We give our power away to so many authority figures, and we don't give ourselves enough credit to be able to be an authority to our own life. And, that's why I started Entrepreneurs in Recovery. It's because, what does that even mean? Well, it's like, I believe that entrepreneurship represents freedom, and I didn't feel free most of my life, even though I wasn't in my body and I wasn't in my mind. And so having this idea of freedom, and then recovery, which is a controversial word I have to always define, because people think I'm talking about Alcoholics Anonymous, which I'm not. I'm talking about recovery from procrastination, recovery from these reoccurring thoughts that just keep you in shame cycles. And then you make the facade of an Instagram character, or whoever you think you are, to not feel the shame. And I think it's so interesting, just the full circle of this conversation, to hit up on all these points, because at the end of the day, it's like, if we're abandoning ourselves every single day by not being true to ourselves or integral, right? I think of the word integration, integral, being in integrity with yourself. What's the point? And I'm saying this out of like chasing all of it, chasing money, chasing this, chasing that. And then, and then coming into realizing like, oh, what is pulling me? What is the real thing? And for me, it's the waves in the ocean, the sun, absolutely my close relationships, or that's really what's most important,
Yeah.
and that's what keeps me grounded and centered and gets me into conversations with people like you, and we get to expand upon this and normalize conversations about men's mental health, or, even how do I, how many people because of COVID and AI are like, shit, I better learn how to start a business, right? Like it's getting scary out there to be like working. Yeah. I'm watching my friends in the mental health space lose their jobs,
Really?
jobs disappearing. So it's like, what are they going to do? These are incredibly talented people with many degrees and all this. And they're looking at like, maybe I should listen to Entrepreneurs in Recovery just because how do I start a business? How do I get going here? So it's just been a great honor to be able to interview you, how you have expanded this newsletter and how important it is in this space as things emerge in psychedelics, because, it's undeniable. We didn't even get into other journeys you've had, but I'm sure there's other journeys that have been extremely healing that,
for sure,
have shaped the Henry we're meeting today.
Yeah. I mean, I love your zoom out on the title of the podcast. And it made me think like, okay, it's entrepreneurs in recovery from stories that no longer serve us, right? Recovery from ways we thought about ourselves that are no longer accurate or we've outgrown, right? So everybody can relate to that. I mean, as long as you're alive, you're changing.
Exactly. So yeah, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I appreciate our back and forth and stuff. And I want to know, like, what are you most excited about bringing to life right now, manifesting in your world? What are you most excited about bringing to life right now?
Well, on the professional side, I'm expanding the newsletter by introducing a third weekly issue, which is pretty exciting. And I'm really just every time I drop into one of these calls from our private membership community for the facilitators, it feels like this is like the crux of the work. Like this is what it's for, because I can normalize the conversation and like introduce people to information in an accessible way till the cows come home. But when we work with the facilitators on how they are positioning themselves and messaging out into the world, I know it's having a direct effect on the front lines of getting people more healing and transformation. So that feels really like, just energizing and important. And so I'm excited about scaling that more and bringing more people into that community who feel aligned to it. And then on the personal side, just being a dad has been such an incredible joy, like the greatest joy of my life. And also a huge identity shift. We didn't talk a ton about this, but like becoming a father, like really shifted what motivates me. Like before it was, achievement and getting love for myself effectively. Right. And now it's like, my life is in service to him in a way. It's like, how do I create a better world for him to live in? And how do I set him up to, show his gifts and explore his gifts and foster them. So I'm excited about that journey continuing to unfold, and also hopefully potentially having another kid, a sibling.
Wow. That's very exciting. Well, we're going to definitely have you back on the show, and we'll talk about part 2 of where Tricycle Day has ended up and reaching 500,000 subscribers and, and then maybe new family members, but we'll bring you back on for sure. And love to do an update on another episode. But yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. Obviously, like I'm going to promote in the show notes Tricycle Day, but how can people reach you and work with you and find you if they want to subscribe? And
yeah, the easiest way is just to go to tricycleday.com, and that's where you can subscribe to the newsletter. And from there, you can learn about all the things that we do, like the community and the agency and whatnot. And then personally, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's my social media platform of choice. I mostly just, post about Tricycle Day and the content that we're putting out there. But I respond to all those messages. And if you respond to the newsletter itself, that also goes to me because I'm the person who writes it. So it's easy to get in touch with me.
Yeah, and in Instagram too. It's funny. I like the memes. So I like the funny ass memes in the psychedelic space. So follow Tricycle Day on Instagram if you want some funny ass humor, because we need some damn humor in this space. It's
important.
It's great.
It's medicine.
It is medicine, yes. Well, Henry, thank you so much, my friend. Really excited to have you on. And hope you have a great rest of your day, my friend. Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs of Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.